This happened in the spring of 1997. My mother was single and was raising my little sister and I. She managed an apartment complex and would pick us up from school and drop us off at the apartments that we lived at while she returned to work for a couple of more hours. I have three older siblings whom all had moved out that at some point had to keep an eye on each other at a young age, so this wasn't really a new premise for us. There was no money for a sitter, and the oldest just had to assume the role, which was me. For the most part, we were really quiet kids in our second and third story unit. We played with our toys, watched a little television, and sometimes played Sega or Nintendo. On this particular afternoon, I recall playing with a figurine from Star Wars, while my sister was doing something else in the same living room. Suddenly, the doorknob started violently shaking. My heart dropped, and I remember it being the first time I had felt such terror. I rushed to the phone and paged my mom 911, and then I dialed 911 to let the operator know that someone was breaking in. The operator reassured me that help was on the way. The door handle was still being messed with, but I was nervous if the deadbolt and chain would be enough. A couple of loud bangs happened, as if someone was ramming the door with their shoulder. Then it all just stopped. The cops arrived shortly before my mom, only to find a note from the maintenance man saying that he was there for an air filter check or something like that. Now, the maintenance man claimed that he announced himself verbally, but I know he was lying. Of course, the cops did nothing, and my mom's complaint to the office didn't yield in this man being fired. Unfortunately, this isn't the scariest part of the story. My mom said the guy would stare her down in the parking lot and just smile at her. The whole situation creeped us out, and we wanted to move, but we couldn't afford the expenses. One night, a couple of weeks later, I was awakened by a loud thud coming from the roof. Being so easily rattled from the previous event, I ran to my mom's room to wake her up. She checked around to make sure everything was in place and reassured me that it was probably a rodent. We went to school the next morning and were dropped off at home in the afternoon as usual. Mom usually did a quick sweep of the place, but this time, something seemed off. It was just a very uneasy feeling the apartment had when walking in. My sister and I were ordered to stay downstairs by the front door while she investigated upstairs. We waited patiently and felt very unnerved when suddenly our mother's shrieking confirmed our suspicion. She came barreling down the stairs and ushered us out the door. We went to a neighbor's and phoned the police. My mother was yelling at them that someone was in our apartment. The police responded pretty quickly, and I was finally able to understand the situation. The bedroom had a walk-in closet that contained the hatch to the attic that connected the entire building's AC and heat unit system. There were shelves that were pretty high up, lining the closet walls. My mother walked in to find a dirty pair of men's underwear lying on the floor. This was enough to send her running and phoning the police. However, the investigation revealed something more. The attic hatch had been disturbed. Just to add, the police found full handprints on the shelves in the closet. The noises I heard the previous night were more than likely this man hoisting himself back up into the crawl space using the shelves to climb on after watching us. The man was taken into custody, but I don't recall what the sentencing was. We ended up moving into my grandmother's house shortly after. I've had some weird stuff happen lately, which reminded me of a strange encounter I had about 5 years ago. It was spring here in Utah, which meant cold mornings that required a coat and usually scraping your windows before leaving. I lived in a relatively remote community, west of the railroad tracks that led to oil refineries in my area. Not exactly a busy area, and very little housing where I lived at the time. One Friday morning, around 9:30 in the morning, as I was on my way to work, my usual route was blocked due to an accident being cleared up, so I took the quieter, longer route through the industrial park east of my house. I passed the only gas station on my way in, and head through the industrial park. which is quiet except for diesel trucks and the rare car like my own. As I came over a small hill and over a set of train tracks, I saw a car pulled over to the side with its hood up, and a guy just standing there next to the driver's side door, looking at me as I drove up the hill. The car was a copper-colored, two-door sports car from the late 70s or early 80s. The guy himself looked straight out of the late 70s. I will never forget this guy. Blue jeans, white shirt collar showing above his coat, tan work boots, darkish tan 70s style leather coat with wool showing at the collar, thick dark mustache, and a John Travolta-like haircut. He was a bigger guy, and probably in his mid-40s, around 6 feet tall or just a bit over. He had a little bit of a gut, but clearly a thick dude who wasn't in bad shape. His hands were in his pockets, but his feet were planted firmly, and his back was straight like he was at a parade rest. As I saw him, I slowed down to see what was the problem. I started to pull over to get behind his car, and he was just staring at me the entire time. No nod of recognition or hand wave to signal me, no smile. Just staring with his face perfectly flat, hands in his pockets, and not moving. I got this super creepy vibe, and as I was about to completely pull over, I pulled away and sped off instead. That was very unlike me. I normally stop to help people all the time, but this guy just gave me a bad feeling I couldn't shake. As I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw he didn't move, but just turned his head a bit to watch me go. As I kept watching, I noticed he turned his head back to stare west, over the tracks for the next car to come along. I got to work, and I felt super bad I didn't help the guy out. But I told my boss, who was also my close friend, about the encounter, and he told me that he was creeped out just hearing about it, and that I should be glad I trusted my gut instinct. I didn't think about it much more, and I started working. On my way home, I took that route back home to see if his car was still there, just in case he had a real problem, and sure enough it was gone. Feeling sort of relieved he had at least gotten his car taken care of, I felt less bad about not helping some stranger because I got weirded out by his appearance and demeanor for some reason. I arrived home, got some sleep, and thought nothing of it. I worked Saturdays at the time, and I always took the long way to work on Saturdays, since I didn't have to worry about traffic. 9:30 the next morning, I'm heading the same way to work that I took the day before, but because the industrial park is full of Monday through Friday type companies, it's always a ghost town on the weekends and evenings. When I came home the previous night, I drove for 15 minutes in that area and did not see another car on the road there. Even the gas station closes its inside operations on Saturdays and evenings after 6. Nobody was ever around that area during off-time hours. So once again, I'm driving over the hill, and sure enough, the same guy's there again. Same car, same spot, hood up, and standing next to the driver's side door. If I hadn't been so creeped out by the guy the day before, I may not have noticed how eerily similar it was. Like he somehow hadn't moved since the day before. This time, however, he reacted to seeing me, pulling a hand out of his pocket and trying to wave me down, without moving his feet, and clearly yelling something. I sped up. He clearly heard my tin can of a Toyota rev up, and I kid you not, he put both hands up, and moved as if to step in front of my car to block me. His face never changed the whole time, just that blank stare and semi-frowned slit of a mouth as he started to step in front of my car into the 2-lane road I was on. I swerved a little to avoid hitting him and kept going. Now here's the thing, that section of the road is straight for quite a ways, and though I was really shaken up by the encounter, I looked in my mirror to see him just step back to his car and kept staring west, just like the day before. He acted like nothing, like a stranger hadn't just swerved to avoid killing him and leaving him to his own devices. It was weird. I never saw him again after that, but I called my local police, of whom I personally know several officers, one of which was a neighbor, thinking maybe he really did have a problem. At the time, a few things stood out to me though, namely, that the day before, the gas station would have been open, and if he didn't have a cell phone, it was less than a block away, and he would have had to have passed it in order to be on that particular side of the road. There was no way he couldn't have seen it and been where he was supposedly broken down. I hadn't thought of it Friday, but it struck me hard Saturday when I saw him again. The second thing that struck me was, it was the exact same everything. Car with the hood up, his outfit, even the shirt so far as I could tell, the place, and even the way he stood just waiting for a car to come from the west, just over a hill where he'd have been hard to see in that spot until you were fairly close. And since I knew his car hadn't been left overnight, that felt very, very wrong. The last thing that bothered me was the dead look on his face when he tried to flag me down. I could see him clearly. I was going 25 miles per hour, which was the speed limit for that particular spot, and he didn't change expression when he saw me. That was probably the most unsettling part to me. It was like he knew what to do, but not how to do it right emotionally. Also, that he just turned back to stare down the road immediately after I passed him, like nothing happened. Later that day, I asked one of my cop buddies if they came across the guy, but they hadn't heard anything. And even later on, I came to find out the cop on that route hadn't come across anybody when he stopped by a bit later. My buddy told me thanks for calling in, and that stranded motorists can act really bizarre when nobody is around, but also that it was good for me to follow my instincts about that guy. Basically, if you feel creeped out by a stranded motorist, call the cops and they'll find and help them. Long story short, I never saw that guy again, and I hope I never do, because whatever his game was, I know his car wasn't just breaking down in the same, conveniently hard to see spot repeatedly. Of all the creepy stuff I've seen in my life, that is still the one that comes to my mind when it comes to unsettling and unnerving run-ins.